Schiff, who is a candidate for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. Stand in the middle and you can twirl around.
How about that? Back here. Skin recognition. That one?
That's fine.
Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about who I am. First of all, I don't have any political experience whatsoever. And, even though I'm running for office, I still don't consider myself to be a politician. See, politicians, they tell voters exactly what they want to hear in order to get elected. And I don't do that. I tell people what they have to hear. And if it means I don't get elected, well, that's okay with me. And, once politicians get elected, regardless of what they said initially, they do the exact opposite to stay in office and to get reelected. And that's not going to happen with me because I don't care if I get reelected. But let me tell you a little bit about what my background is and why I'm running. And first, I'm a businessman. I run a small business, Euro Pacific Capital. It's a brokerage firm. I'm based in Westport, Connecticut. I handle retail accounts for 15,000 or so clients, about $2 billion in assets. I manage money. I run a mutual fund. I have another mutual fund that's coming out next week. I do investment banking. But I started out as a retail broker. I worked at a couple of small firms, and then I worked at Schiff for a little while. And I didn't really like it. I didn't think that individual investors got a fair shake, and so I went on my own. And I started all by myself. I worked out of my one-bedroom apartment. I didn't have, any funds other than my own funds. I saved a little bit of money when I worked. But I started from scratch. I had no employees. I did everything by myself. Early on in my career, I began warning people about the problems I saw in the NASDAQ, and particularly the dot-coms. I saw the big bubble in 1998, 99, and I spent most of those 3 years from 97 to 2000 cold calling as many people as I could, warning them about the NASDAQ bubble, trying to get people to sell those stocks. And it was difficult because a lot of my friends were making a lot of money because the easiest way to make money as a stockbroker was to sell people internet stocks. That's what they wanted. They were easy to sell. They sold like hotcakes, and people made a lot of money. But I knew that it was going to end in a disaster, and so I spent that time trying to convince people not to buy those stocks or to sell those stocks. And it was difficult because people didn't want to hear that. They wanted to hear that they could get rich quick in these stocks. But ultimately, when the NASDAQ bubble burst, that's when my business really started to take off. 2000 was a very good year for me as the market started to decline. A lot of clients and a lot of prospects. I scored a lot of points with people, and it enabled me to really start to increase my business. And I started hiring people. And as late as 2000, I didn't have any employees. I think I had a secretary, and that was it. And I did all the compliance and all the operations work myself. Now, I have 6 offices. I have better than 100 employees. And I would have a lot more employees if it wasn't for the government. It wasn't for all the rules and regulations that I have to comply with in the investment industry. Particularly, after the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble between 2002 and 2003, they added a lot of regulation. And then after September 11th with the Patriot Act, they have a lot of regulations. Now, I actually have 7 employees that do nothing but comply with the rules and regulations. I used to do it all myself. Now I have 7 people doing it, and they can't even do it. My legal bills now at my company are more than I used to earn because the rules are so complicated that you need outside legal counsel to help you navigate them. So I built the business up. I understand how to grow a business, where jobs come from, and I understand from firsthand experience how government rules and regulations inhibit businesses from growing and expanding. I succeeded despite all the roadblocks that the government put in my place, but I'm glad that I started when I did, because I could never do it today. If a young person tried to leave a major Wall Street firm and go out on his own and start a brokerage firm, it couldn't even be done. I mean, unless you had really, really wealthy parents or you had a lot of money to do it, it's just the rules and regulations are now so cumbersome and so expensive that the barriers to entry are so great that no one can do it. And all that has been created, all that new regulation has just come in the last decade. And I can imagine how much worse they're about to make it, because now that Obama is finished with health care, he's turning his attention to re-regulation of the financial industry, which is only going to make matters worse. But in addition to having the background in business, I understand economics. And my understanding of economics not only led me to understand the NASDAQ bubble, but the housing bubble and the bigger problems in our economy that ultimately resulted in a financial crisis in 2008. I began to get very worried about the economy in 2002 to 2004. I started writing op-eds. I was very critical of the policies under George Bush, and in particularly the monetary policy of Alan Greenspan that I saw as very counterproductive. When the NASDAQ bubble burst in 2000, the government should have done nothing. And let the economy correct, let the recession run its course, because we made a lot of mistakes during the 1990s. Those mistakes needed to be corrected. A lot of capital, a lot of labor was misallocated based on that mania, and we should have allowed a more severe recession to correct those problems. But the politicians didn't let that happen. We slashed interest rates down to 1%. And we inflated a housing bubble, and we encouraged reckless speculation on Wall Street, reckless consumption on Main Street, all because we didn't want to have a recession. And so we had record car sales and record home sales, and as a result, we bankrupted our lending institutions and we bankrupted our automobile companies. But it wasn't because of the free market. It wasn't because of capitalism. It was because of all the things the government did to interfere with capitalism. All the rules and regulations and subsidies and the artificially low interest rates, they were the problem. And I recognized that early on. And I began warning about it. I wrote a book that I started writing in 2005, and I finished it in mid-2006, and it came out in early 2007 called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. And in that book, I laid out everything that was wrong with the U.S. economy and how it was going to implode. I wrote back then that companies like Fannie and Freddie were going to go bankrupt, that real estate prices were going to collapse, that it was going to take down our lending institutions, that we were going to have the worst recession since the Great Depression, that we would have double-digit unemployment. But all of that I knew was coming, that wasn't the real problem. That wasn't what my real fear was. What my fear was how the government would react to that crisis. And unfortunately, every single thing that I warned that they would do, they've done. My biggest fear was that the government would try to rescue the economy with stimulus, that the government would try to bail out failed institutions, prop up the housing market by running even bigger deficits and printing even more money. And unfortunately, that is exactly what they did. And because they've done that, not only have we not solved the underlying economic problems, we've made them worse. And we've laid the foundation for a much greater economic crisis, which is probably going to hit sometime in the next couple of years. For all I know, it's going to start before this election. But we're not going to go long without having it happen. Maybe 2011, 2012, latest. But we're going to have a much worse financial crisis than 2008 because of what the government did. And I was warning about this, not just in my book. I started going on financial television in 2005. And for about 3 years, I was a regular on business television. I was on CNBC, I was on CNN, I was on Fox, I was on Bloomberg. I was on every week on one show or another. There are hundreds and hundreds of shows. And warning about these problems. And people laughed it off, people thought I was kind of nuts, but they brought me on anyway because it was good ratings, because they all got to make fun of me. But ultimately, all the things that I said have happened. There's a few things that have yet to happen, but unfortunately, they're going to. And as a result of a lot of those television appearances, I got a pretty good following internationally. Particularly once a lot of my forecasts came true, a lot of young people started following me on YouTube. There's a lot of people who were copying my television shows and putting them on YouTube. We didn't do any of them ourselves, but a lot of people were putting them on YouTube. And some people were making compilations of some of my presentations and putting them together. One of them somebody made was they called it Peter Schiff Was Right. And about 1.7 million people have seen this. And it's a 10-minute YouTube clip, but it just shows me making forecasts and other people on Fox and CNBC just kind of making fun of it. But I got pretty popular. And as a result of that popularity, a lot of people around the country encouraged me to run for the Senate seat in Connecticut, particularly when they saw that Chris Dodd had the seat and was up for re-election. And it seemed that it would be a very fitting matchup for me to run against the guy who helped cause the economic crisis, the biggest, protector of Fannie and Freddie versus one of the only people that actually saw it coming. So that it seemed like it would be a very, ideal matchup. And so I got into the race. And I know Chris Dodd is no longer in it, but I still think it's a race that I can win, and I think it's a race that I need to win.